Dear people watching and listening, Assalamu alaikum. Kindly like and share this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Please support my channel by contributing to my Patreon account so that I can continue making the audiobook series. This book tells in detail about the Muslim conquest of Spain under the Umayyad Caliphate from 711 AD to 718 AD. The conquest is also known as the Muslim conquest of the Iberian Peninsula or the Umayyad conquest of the Visigothic kingdom. This conquest destroyed the Visigothic kingdom and established the Umayyad wilaya of Al-Andalus. It also resulted in the expansion of the Umayyad Caliphate and the Muslim rule into Europe. Start of Chapter 11. The Coming of Musa. Musa bin Nusayr took the decision to cross to Spain himself with a larger and more mobile army than Tariq's and take over direction of the war. Most historians tell us that his decision was motivated by envy of Tariq's success in the peninsula in terms of glory and spoils. That he did not wish Tariq to be the only one to reap the harvest of the conquest, and even grudged him his victories, that he wished to claim the glory for himself. This is true, but it is an oversimplified statement which casts an unfair aspersion on Musa. Civilian historians are not always aware of the intense rivalries which affect commanding generals in war, the desire for fame, the thirst for glory, the hunger for recognition as great victors. This leads to fierce competition and manifests in efforts not only to outdo their rivals, but even at times to do them down. In our own times we have seen evidence of this envy in the Second World War, in all armies of the East and the West, when leading generals strained every nerve to undercut one another. In itself, this rivalry is not only understandable, but also healthy. The desire for fame and glory is a nobler motivation than the lust for money or the craving for power over men, which distinguish successful men of many other professions. This rivalry applies also to Musa and Tariq. But envy of Tariq was not the only reason which led Musa to cross to Spain and conduct operations in person. Such partial statements are a disservice to historical truth, and in this instance detract from the stature of Musa, whose place in history as a holy warrior, as a conqueror and statesman was already assured. Musa had spent his life in the service of Islam, extended the borders of Islam and won victories in the name of Allah, which few others could claim. After a lifetime spent in the saddle, he had reached the stature of a giant which no general of the time could dispute or challenge. Musa bin Nusayr was a master of war. In matters of war, he had nothing to learn from Tariq, and if his emotions aroused envy of his younger subordinate's victories, it only showed that he was human. Musa was coming to Spain not only for war and glory, which all generals seek, but also to serve Islam and gain merit with Allah. It took time to prepare the army which would cross with Musa. Regiments had to be organized, horses and weapons provided to those who would use them. A large number of boats had to be constructed to ferry the army across the strait. Arrangements had to be made for the administration of North Africa in the absence of Musa, who appointed his son Abdullah to act as governor in his place at Kairouan. The army numbered 18,000, a mainly cavalry force and a mainly Arab force with a few Berber troops, in contrast with Tariq's mainly Berber force, which had a few Arab troops. Musa took with him a number of venerated Muslims known as Tabi, Arabic Tabi'in. In the time of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, any Muslim who knew him personally was called a Sahib or Sahabi, meaning companion. After the Prophet, any Muslim who knew a Sahabi was called Tabi, that is, one who follows. Musa himself was a Tabi, and at this time had in his company 25 Tabis or Tabi'in. He took 3 of his distinguished sons with him, Abdul Aziz, Abdul Ala, and Marwan, as also Count Julian, the durable old campaigner who had given the Muslims the opening to Spain, of which they had taken full advantage. Musa was ready to start in June 712, Ramadan 93 Hijri. The army was launched from Ceuta. Musa avoided Gibraltar, perhaps for psychological reasons, and landed at another spot not far from Algeciras. This place came to be known as Marsa Musa, that is Harbour of Musa, while the hilly region around it came to be known as Jabal Musa, that is Hill of Musa or Mount Musa. From here he moved the army to Algeciras and formed a base for the initial part of his campaign. When the army had concentrated at Algeciras, Musa called a council of war at which, apart from his Muslim officers, Julian and his lieutenants were also present. At this conference he would plan and give orders for the next operation. Everyone expected that he would follow Tariq's route, but Musa made it clear that he had no such intention. "I shall not take the route which Tariq has taken," he said, "nor follow in his wake." Julian, who was playing the part of chief adviser and guide, responded, "We shall lead you on a way which is better than his and guide you to cities more important and more wealthy than those taken by him, which have not been conquered before, but which you shall conquer, if God wills it." Julian was exaggerating a bit, but the offer was pleasing to Musa, and he set about making his plans accordingly. Musa's decision not to follow in Tariq's footsteps was not just an emotional rejection of his subordinates' example, it was also strategical wisdom. To advance with a large army through a zone already cleared by a predecessor would be a waste of effort and would not make military sense. There was a lot more of Spain to conquer, with hostile forces yet to be subdued. Musa was determined to take all of Spain. He would start with the southwestern quarter of the peninsula. Musa began the operation by sweeping through the coastal zone west of Algeciras in order to establish a broad base for launching his forces into the interior. This was in July 712, Shawwal 93 Hijri. There was no battle, and so far as is known, no blood was shed. The towns and villages through which he passed submitted without opposition. When Musa had got to Vecher, he turned north. The first place where he met serious opposition was Medina Sidonia. This was an ancient town perched atop a large hill which rose 1,000 feet above sea level and dominated the fertile countryside around it. Musa laid siege to the town and soon after attacked and conquered it. This was his first battle and his first victory in Spain. From here he advanced towards Seville. Before tackling Seville, Musa would dispose of 2 fortresses which acted as outposts of the city. One was Alcalá de Gadera, 10 miles to the southeast, the other Carmona, 20 miles to the east of the city on the main road to Cordoba. Without taking these 2 places, he would be in a vulnerable position, because while engaged with Seville, his rear would be open to attack from the direction of the 2 fortresses. Their clearance was necessary. Alcalá de Gadera was the smaller of the 2 and posed no problem. Musa stormed the place and took it without difficulty. Leaving a garrison in occupation, he marched. Carmona was built for defense, by nature's design and by the skill of the military engineer, an almost impregnable fortress. It was said that there was no stronger position in Spain and none more difficult for a besieging force to capture. It stood upon a ridge which rose above the plain, its slopes getting steeper near the top, and at places capped by an escarpment. Musa invested Carmona without getting too near the walls. It was a loose kind of siege. Musa could find no way of attacking and getting inside the town, and he possessed no siege equipment. Thus some days passed. Unable to find an answer to the problem of capturing the fortress, Musa turned for advice to his Christian allies who knew the country well. They told him that Carmona could not be taken except by finesse and guile. Musa, the master of stratagem, then devised a plan to get the fortress without having to scale its walls. Late one afternoon, a band of Christian cavalrymen came galloping to one of the gates of Carmona, saying that they were the survivors of a clash with the Muslims and had got away while their comrades had fallen in battle. They were dressed and armed in the normal Gothic fashion and spoke the local language. No one in Carmona knew that the horses they rode had been provided by Musa. They were let in as fugitives and given shelter. In fact, they were welcomed as an addition to the defenders' strength. That night a large body of Muslim cavalry rode unseen and unheard to the main gate of the fort, known as the Gate of Cordoba. At the appointed time, the fugitives, all followers of Julian, opened the gate. The Muslim horsemen rode through the gate to the center of the town, where they made short work of those who resisted their advance. By morning all was over. Only those Goths remained alive who surrendered and were now captive in Muslim hands. With the fall of Carmona, the entire region east of Seville was clear of Gothic troops. Musa advanced and made contact with Seville, which shared with Cordoba the distinction of being the greatest prize in southern Spain. Seville was symbolic of ancient Spain. It had existed since the earliest Iberian times and had been occupied successively by Phoenicians, Greeks, and Carthaginians. According to Muslim legend, it was a man named Ishban who conquered Spain and built this city, which he named Ishbilia, and the country too was so named, from Ishbilia, which is the Arabic name for Seville, and its legendary founder, Ishban, is derived the Arabic name for the peninsula, Isbania. To the Western world it was known as Hispalis, conquered by the Romans in 205 BC during their first thrust into Spain in the Second Punic War. They made it the capital of the province of Baetica, which meant the entire southern region of Spain except for the southwestern corner of the peninsula. The city was thoroughly Romanized and called Little Rome, and was later to give Rome the emperors Trajan and Hadrian. With the coming of the Germanic nations at the beginning of the 5th century, it was occupied by the Vandals and became the capital of their kingdom, the kingdom being southern Spain, which they called Vandalicia. But the Vandals passed on to North Africa, and the Visigoth power which took over Spain established its capital at Toledo. Seville was no longer a seat of political and military power, but it remained a large and wealthy city and an important religious center for Christian Spain. Situated on the left bank of the Guadalquivir, it was a fortified city with strong battlements to challenge an attacker. It could be attacked only from the east and along its short flanks to north and south. Its rear, that is the west, was protected by the great river. This was the city which Musa approached in about August 712, Zukat 93 Hijri. He laid siege to Seville. Historians tell us that the siege went on for several months, but it could not have lasted more than 2 or 3 months, in view of the events which followed and which are described in subsequent chapters. Then Musa conquered Seville. Nothing is known about how he did it, what course the battle took, how much blood was shed, but he took Seville and the Christian warriors effected their escape. They crossed the river and retreated westwards, the bulk of them going to Beja and Oxonoba. The rest of the population of the city came peacefully under Muslim rule. Musa lost no time in organizing the administration of Seville as a conquest of Islam. He placed the local Jews in charge of the administration and left a detachment of about 100 soldiers to enforce law and order. Then, with the rest of the army, he marched to the place where he was to face his greatest military challenge in Spain, the ancient and powerful city of Merida. End of chapter 11.